The wind screamed like a banshee, tearing at Leo Thorne's robes as he hung suspended 500 feet above the astronomy tower, his knuckles white against the vibrating wood of his Clean Sweep 7. 12 green streaks of light converged on his position, missing his left ear by less than an inch and singeing the ends of his hair. He was the last line of defense in the air. The other 3 Gryffindor patrollers were already plummeting toward the Forbidden Forest, their brooms snapped and their bodies limp. It was just him, a dozen elite Death Eaters in a perfect predatory circle, and a terrifying realization. He had exactly 6 seconds before their next volley turned the astronomy tower into rubble and buried the 51st years sleeping inside. He didn't have the power to fight them. He didn't have the speed to outrun them. But he had the one thing Professor McGonagall had forbidden him from ever using again: the suicide dive. The spell that was supposed to kill him faster than any curse. 7 months ago, Leo had found the incantation in a confiscation bin filched from a dragon reserve in Romania. It wasn't a combat spell, it was a physics anomaly. A charm designed to compress air around a falling object until it became a solid projectile of kinetic force. The theory was simple: turn yourself into a meteorite. The practice was insanity. Every time he tried it in secret, he blacked out from the G-force. McGonagall had caught him once, vanishing the scroll and docking him 50 points, telling him that turning a broomstick into a kinetic missile was a fancy way to break his neck. But looking at the masked figures laughing behind their silver masks as they charged their wands for the final blow, Leo knew that breaking his neck was now the optimistic outcome. If you want to know how this forgotten 6th year turned a useless banned piece of magic into Hogwarts' last defense, read the following story with a warm, deep, and whimsical British accent, similar to a classic fantasy audiobook narrator. Stay with me until the end of this story. The war had changed everything at Hogwarts, but the sky was the worst. The Carrows didn't look up often, but the Death Eaters used the airspace to torment the students, buzzing the towers and terrifying the owls. Leo wasn't a prefect. He wasn't a Dumbledore's army leader. He was a substitute beater with mediocre grades in Transfiguration and a reputation for reckless flying. He wasn't supposed to be a hero. He was just the guy on patrol duty when the elite squad arrived. They called themselves the Black Kestrels, a hunting party that specialized in aerial slaughter. They didn't duel, they swarmed. They were currently tightening their formation, a perfect ring of 12 brooms circling the highest tower, preparing a synchronized reductor curse that would bring the roof down on the sleeping students below. Leo banked hard to the right, dodging a curse that singed his eyebrows. He needed altitude. The spell required height. Read the following story with a warm, deep, and whimsical British accent, similar to a classic fantasy audiobook narrator. Unadulterated vertical distance. He pulled the handle of his Clean Sweep up, forcing the sluggish broom to climb. His lungs burned in the freezing air. The Death Eaters saw him retreating upward and laughed, their voices amplified by magic. They thought he was running. They thought he was abandoning the castle. Let them think it. He just needed 500 more feet. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. This was the moment where courage usually met stupidity. He had tried to be a duelist earlier, throwing stunners that fizzled out before reaching the enemy, and it had cost him a slice of hexed flesh on his thigh that was currently soaking his trousers in warm blood. Conventional magic had failed. It was time for physics. As he climbed into the thin air where the oxygen was scarce, Leo felt a strange calm. If this forgotten legend of Hogwarts is already touching your heart and you'd like to help keep these stories alive, read the following story with a warm, deep, and whimsical British accent, similar to a classic fantasy audiobook narrator. You can support the channel by clicking the thanks button below the video. Every little bit helps me continue bringing you more hidden tales of courage and magic. He reached the apex. The clouds were close enough to touch, cold and wet against his face. Below him, the 12 Death Eaters were tiny black specks arranged in a perfect circle, their wands glowing with the orange light of the impending bombardment. They had stopped paying attention to him. That was their mistake. Leo pointed his broom tip directly at the center of their formation. He didn't grip the handle for steering. He gripped it for survival. He took a breath that tasted of ozone and fear, pointed his wand at his own chest, and whispered the incantation that felt like swallowing a stone. Aeris compressio. The world instantly went silent. A shimmering, translucent cone of distorted light formed around him and the broom, locking him into a vacuum. The air pressure dropped so sharply his ears popped painfully. Then, read the following story with a warm, deep, and whimsical British accent, similar to a classic fantasy audiobook narrator. He kicked off. Gravity took him, but it wasn't just falling. The spell sucked the air from in front of him and pushed it behind him, doubling, tripling his acceleration. He wasn't flying, he was being fired from a cannon. 4 seconds, that was all it took. Second one. The speed blurred his vision into grey streaks. He felt the skin of his face pulling back, the G-force pressing his eyes into his skull. He was moving faster than a firebolt, faster than a snitch, faster than thought. Second two. The cone of compressed magic around him began to scream, a high-pitched whine, as the air molecules were crushed into a solid wall of force. He was a human warhead. He couldn't steer. If he missed the center of the ring, he would smash into the astronomy tower and vaporize himself. The wand in his pocket felt like it was melting. Second three. The Death Eaters looked up. They didn't see a boy on a broom. They saw a distortion in the sky, a ripple of moonlight plummeting straight down. There was no time to raise a shield. There was no time to scatter. The leader's mask turned upward just as the sound barrier shattered. Second four. Impact. Leo didn't hit a person. He hit the space in the exact center of their circle. He punched a hole through the atmosphere at terminal velocity. The spell detonated. It wasn't a fire explosion. It was a concussive hammer blow of pure air pressure. The shockwave expanded outward in a perfect, brutal sphere. It hit the 12 Death Eaters like a physical wall. Their formation disintegrated instantly. Brooms snapped like matchsticks. Wards shattered with the sound of breaking glass. Bodies were hurled violently in every direction, some spinning into the darkness, others tumbling uncontrollably toward the forbidden forest, their wands lost, their consciousness gone before they even started falling. The concussion cleared the clouds for a mile radius. Leo's broom disintegrated under the strain. The tail twigs stripped away. Read the following story with a warm, deep, and whimsical British accent, similar to a classic fantasy audiobook narrator. The handle fractured, and the charm collapsed. He was thrown free, tumbling through the chaotic air, half blind and deafened. He didn't remember pulling his wand. He didn't remember casting the cushioning charm that caught him 10 feet above the Quidditch pitch. He only remembered the ground rushing up to meet him, hard and cold. When he opened his eyes, the silence was absolute. He was lying in the mud, staring up at the sky. His left arm was broken. His ears were ringing with a phantom whine. But above him, the sky was empty. The ring of fire was gone. No orange lights gathered near the towers. No mocking laughter echoed down. Just the quiet, indifferent stars and the drifting debris of 12 racing brooms raining down like confetti. He lay there for an hour before Hagrid found him. The half-giant carried him to the hospital wing, weeping about miracles. Madame Pomfrey fixed his arm and gave him a sleeping draught without asking questions. The official report the next morning was vague. It spoke of a sudden atmospheric disturbance that disoriented the attackers. It mentioned a localized storm front. Nobody credited the boy with the mediocre grades who was currently sleeping through breakfast. But later, much later, whispers started in the Gryffindor common room. A first year had seen it from the window. A blur, a boom, a sky cleared in a heartbeat. They looked at Leo differently after that. Not as a hero, but as something more dangerous. The boy who turned himself into a bullet. It is a reminder that in war, the most dangerous weapon isn't always the Elder Wand or a forbidden curse. Sometimes it's just physics, desperation, and a wizard crazy enough to use them. If this forgotten legend of Hogwarts touched your heart, tell me in the comments. What would you have done in Leo's place? Like the video, share it with another Harry Potter fan, and subscribe to hear more hidden stories of courage, magic. Read the following story with an impossible odds. Sometimes the smallest spell is the one that saves the castle.